What do you think of the whole we're on a floating rock so nothing matters mindset? I initially thought it was so freeing, and now I think it's kind of dangerous, and I want to talk about it. This might be kind of long, but I think it's really important actually, and it's very interesting. So stick with me and tell me your thoughts. So, this floating rock mentality that's so popular right now is essentially a positive strain of nihilism, which is a belief that life is fundamentally meaningless. And I want to tell y'all a little about the origins of traditional nihilist philosophy because I think it's relevant. So, if you know anything about Nietzsche, the 19th century German philosopher most associated with nihilism, you probably know that he famously said, God is dead. But you may not have heard what he said next. God is dead and we've killed him. How shall we comfort ourselves? So Nietzsche was living during the Enlightenment, which was a revolution of reason and intellect that happened in Europe in the 1800s and which came off the back of the scientific revolution. And he basically believed that humans were on their way to disproving the existence of God. And Nietzsche was an atheist, but he didn't necessarily see this as a good thing, at least not only a good thing. Don't get me wrong, Nietzsche was very critical of the church and particularly how it characterized natural desires as sinful, but he did recognize that human beings struggle to cope with suffering without belief in a higher power or a deeper meaning to life. There's so much more I could say about this, but let's get out of the 1800s, cut to now. It's 2022. You're scrolling TikTok. You come across a post that says, hey, we're on a floating rock. So that thing you're worrying about, don't worry about it. We're increasingly seeing this type of optimistic nihilism become the ethos of young people who have unplugged from organized religion. I found my way into this way of thinking after deconstructing my religion, and in some ways I found it so freeing. And I think it makes sense that so many of us have found ourselves here for a couple reasons. First, I truly think the era we're living in now, following the advent of the internet, will be historically regarded as another age of enlightenment, if you will, in the sense that access to information and ability to disseminate information has skyrocketed so exponentially and to a degree that I think anyone pre-internet never would have been able to imagine. And I think that history has shown that when there are big advances in communication facilitating technology, like the printing press, to give an old example, that sort of has an unraveling function for systems and particularly for organized religion. And so just like during the Enlightenment, we're seeing this big turning away from organized religion. And just like Nietzsche said, when you're leaving a system that has characterized your innate uncontrollable desires as sinful, say you're a queer person who is growing up in a non-affirming church, it makes sense that when you feel empowered to leave that, you're going to pivot hard in the other direction, right? Like it's a very straightforward way out to conclude, oh, that God that frowned upon me for having a crush on Lindsay Lohan and Parent Trap, they're actually entirely made up and lots of smart people agree with me. So we're on a floating rock. I'll be gay if I want to. And I do think the floating rock mindset is a really helpful stepping stone when you're moving away from an organized religion that didn't serve you to help you remember to not treat your life like an application for afterlife and to prioritize maximizing joy and love and happiness now. But I also think the underlying belief of meaninglessness of life can be really harmful and can have harmful outcomes, especially in the face of suffering. So Nietzsche talks about this concept of an Übermensch, Superman, which is a person who, in the absence of organized religion, is able to come up with an intrinsically sourced value system that they can use to navigate the world and cope with suffering. But he actually thought that this was really rare and that many people following departure from organized religion would sort of spiral into purposelessness, apathy, and would spend their lives trying to fill their time with meaningless entertainment, which is a kind of chilling prediction in the age of like the endless social media scroll, right? My point here is that most of us are going to like we're on a floating rock, so let me not shame myself or stress out about my job, right? That feels good. But what about when we're on a floating rock and something incomprehensibly horrible just happened, and how do I make sense of that? For many of us, that's going to feel less good. I want to be clear that I'm not making a case for you to believe in God. All I'm saying is that if you've found your way to this purposelessness mentality, it's important to use that as a stepping stone and not a destination, and build a value system that can help you make sense of life even in the face of suffering. Because what happens when we're on a floating rock and I'm not having a good time on the rock? What then? And that value system doesn't have to include a higher power, but on the topic of God, I'll say this. Unlike Nietzsche, I do not believe it's possible for human reason to kill God, unless you believe that human perception is infallible, meaning everything in existence can be perceived by us. Then it's not really possible to disprove the existence of anything. Like, absence of proof of yes isn't proof of no. And if you believe that there will always be unknowable things, then who's to say that God, or whatever you want to call a higher power, isn't one of those unknowable things? And here's the other thing. Regardless of whether you think belief in God is logical, if it gives you comfort and peace and helps you love yourself and others more completely and helps you cope in the face of suffering, I think you should do it. And you shouldn't worry about whether it's true or logical, and it doesn't matter if it's true. Okay, I think I'm done. I know this was a very long rant, and I know you come here for handstands, and I give you 10-minute rants about nihilism, and I have no excuse for that other than who I am as a person. But I don't want your next big, terrible thing to happen and for you to just be consumed by the purposelessness and floating rockness of it all. Okay, I'm done. Tell me what you thought about this. I'm very glad you are on this floating rock. I love you.